There is a moment, often subtle, almost imperceptible, when the curtain shifts and for the first time you see the strings. They were always there, trembling above your head like faint lines of light or shadow, guiding every gesture, every thought you mistook for wholly your own. In that instant, the familiar world fractures. What you believed to be spontaneous becomes a pattern. What you trusted as instinct begins to reveal its quiet rehearsal. You stand there, still, almost breathless, watching the outline of the puppeteer in the dim glow beyond the stage, and you know, with an unsettling certainty, that nothing can ever be the same. The phrase, "Once you see the puppeteer, you'll never be the puppet again," is more than a clever turn of words. It is a threshold. It is a key that once turned cannot be undone, for it does not merely open a door, it dissolves the walls. It is not the discovery of a hidden fact, nor the memorization of a secret code, but the recognition of an architecture beneath everything, the mechanisms of influence, the inherited scripts, the unconscious agreements you never realized you signed. The puppeteer could be anything: society's unspoken rules, a web of cultural myths, the slow conditioning of family and upbringing, the constant drip of media and tradition, or even the internalized voice of fear disguised as prudence. Once seen, it cannot be unseen, for the act of seeing rewires the seer. Imagine for a moment that you have spent your whole life inside a theater. The sets change, the lighting shifts, the actors rotate in and out. Sometimes the play is a comedy, sometimes a tragedy, sometimes a romance. You cry, you laugh, you rage, you fall in love again and again, thinking each plot is the sum of reality. But one day, perhaps by accident, you stumble backstage. The sets are painted wood, the moon is a paper disc, the castle walls are cloth. And there, moving quietly yet with omnipresent control, is the one who arranges it all. You realize the actors have been reading from scripts handed to them. You realize you have, too. You return to your seat, but the magic is gone. Not in a cynical way. Rather, you now see a deeper magic, one that includes the illusion as part of its art. This awareness is both liberation and burden. Liberation, because you are no longer helpless in the story's flow. You can step out of it, alter it, or write your own. Burden, because you can never again find shelter in ignorance. You cannot unknow the sight of the strings. There is no gentle return to the naive comfort of believing that every movement you make is entirely yours, untouched by unseen hands. The puppeteer is not always a villain. That is the first surprise. We are quick to think in terms of oppressor and oppressed, manipulator and manipulated. But the truth is more intricate. The puppeteer may love the puppet show may be a protective spell, a way to keep chaos from flooding in. The structures that limit you are often the same structures that gave you a sense of identity, safety, and belonging. To sever the strings carelessly is to risk being dropped, unmoored, in a vastness you are unprepared to navigate. That is why seeing the puppeteer is so momentous. It requires a readiness not just to rebel, but to evolve. In the deeper, almost cosmic sense, the puppeteer is the sum total of every force, seen and unseen, that shapes the human drama. On one level, it is the parent teaching you what is right and wrong, the teacher rewarding obedience, the law enforcing conformity. On another, it is the gravitational pull of the collective unconscious, the archetypal patterns Carl Jung spoke of, the mythic currents that flow beneath civilizations and across generations. On yet another, it is the self itself, not as a fixed identity, but as a construct, a mask worn by consciousness to navigate the material world. When you see the puppeteer, you may in fact be seeing yourself, not the self you thought you were, but the one who has been quietly authoring your experience from the shadows. This revelation is unsettling because it forces a confrontation with complicity. You realize you were not only the puppet, you were in some subtle way always cooperating with the puppeteer. The strings were not shackles, but extensions, lines of communication between your inner fears, desires, and the external structures that mirrored them. You were part of the performance, not merely its victim. In this light, awakening is less about overthrowing an oppressor, and more about recognizing that the dance between puppet and puppeteer is a dance you can choose to change. Many resist seeing the puppeteer because the role of the puppet is comfortable. Puppets are given their lines, their cues, their applause. To be the puppet is to be carried along by the current of a river whose source you never question. But to be free is to stand in the open, without the guiding pull of strings, and that is a more terrifying prospect than most will admit. Freedom is not just release, it is responsibility. And so the statement, "Once you see the puppeteer, you'll never be the puppet again," is not a promise of perpetual ease. It is a warning and a blessing in equal measure. Once you cross that line of sight, you will forever live in the knowledge of the mechanism. Even if you choose to remain in the play, it will be with awareness, and that awareness will change the way you speak, the way you move, the way you feel the tug of each invisible thread. You may even choose at times to pick up the strings and dance deliberately, knowing it to be a dance, not mistaking it for reality itself. This is why the metaphor of the puppeteer resonates across both the practical and the mystical. In the practical world, it is the recognition of systems of control, social, economic, psychological, and the choice to engage with them consciously rather than passively. In the mystical, it is the sudden glimpse into the architecture of existence itself, the awareness that life is both play and player, illusion and truth, dream and dreamer. The journey that follows such a sighting is not one of simple rebellion, but of integration. It is about learning to live without losing your balance in the knowledge that the stage is an elaborate design. It is about stepping into a higher authorship of your own story, while understanding that some forces will always remain, if not beyond your control, then at least beyond your comprehension. And so, if you are ready, we will explore this idea not as a slogan to be admired, but as a living insight to be inhabited. We will travel through its core themes, descend into its symbolic narratives, return with tools for its practical integration, and conclude with a call to transformation. For now, in this opening breath, I will leave you with the echo of the first unveiling. The moment you see the hand that moves the strings, you will never again mistake the motion for your own unshaped will. You will have stepped into a wider theater, one that asks of you not just to see, but to choose. The sentence, "Once you see the puppeteer, you'll never be the puppet again," contains within it a constellation of truths that extend far beyond the immediate shock of discovery. It is not merely about spotting manipulation. It is about uncovering the scaffolding of reality itself, the intertwined systems of belief, conditioning, and perception that shape the way we move through the world. To grasp its core themes is to realize that this phrase is less a declaration and more a compass. It points toward an uncharted territory of consciousness, where the air is thin, but the view stretches beyond the horizon of the ordinary. One of the central themes is the unveiling of hidden control. Most people live in an unbroken trance, believing that their choices are free because they can feel themselves deciding. They do not question the invisible architecture surrounding those choices. The puppeteer, in its simplest form, represents the force, be it cultural, psychological, spiritual, or systemic, that subtly influences your decisions, thoughts, and identity without your consent. This influence is not always sinister. Sometimes it is even benevolent, like the hand that steadies a child learning to walk. But whether it nurtures or exploits, it shapes reality in ways the puppet does not perceive. Seeing the puppeteer is the moment of rupture in which you realize the agency you thought you had has been operating inside a carefully built frame. Another theme is the transformation of perception. Once you witness the hidden strings, your vision changes forever, not only in the metaphorical sense, but in the way your mind categorizes and interprets experience. You start to see patterns you previously overlooked. You notice the way certain phrases in conversation are not spontaneous, but rehearsed echoes of something heard in media or passed down by habit. You detect the subtext behind news stories, the framing behind advertisements, the quiet social codes embedded in gatherings. It is as if your eyes have adjusted to a new spectrum of light, revealing lines, shadows, and movements in the periphery that were invisible before. The world, once solid, now has seams. Closely bound to this is the confrontation with identity. Before seeing the puppeteer, identity feels like something you own, your personality, your beliefs, your habits, your values. Afterward, you begin to ask unsettling questions. How much of me was written by others? How many of my convictions are simply the result of living in a particular time, culture, and family? The realization can be destabilizing. The self you've been defending may turn out to be a composite character, stitched together by decades of scripting. This does not make the self false, but it does make it flexible. It becomes less a fortress and more a costume, one you can alter or shed. Then there is the tension between freedom and responsibility. To no longer be a puppet is not the same as becoming free in the purest sense. The strings may loosen, but without them, you are suddenly responsible for movements you never had to make on your own. Before, you could blame the puppeteer for the shape of your path. Now, the path is yours to create or abandon. Freedom sounds glorious until it is in your hands, and you realize it demands constant authorship, constant awareness. It is easier to sleep under the puppeteer's choreography than to remain awake in your own. Many, upon seeing the puppeteer, will attempt to return to sleep, to pretend they saw nothing. This, too, is a choice, but it is one that can never be fully convincing again. There is also the inevitability of influence. Seeing the puppeteer does not mean escaping influence entirely. Even without the original strings, there will always be forces, internal and external, that shape your direction. The difference is awareness. You might still dance, but now you know who calls the music. You might even choose to be guided, but it will be deliberate, conscious, chosen. The insight is not that you can cut every string, but that you can decide which ones to keep, which ones to sever, and which new ones to weave. Beneath these themes lies the deeper, universal truth of illusion and reality. The puppeteer is not only a metaphor for social manipulation, it is a symbol for Maya, the veil described in Hindu philosophy, or the cave shadows in Plato's allegory. It represents the structures of perception that filter the raw truth of existence into a digestible story. These structures are necessary for functioning in the world. Raw reality is overwhelming. But when you catch a glimpse beyond them, you begin to sense the vastness from which they draw. You realize that your daily struggles and victories, though meaningful, are framed within a larger stage whose boundaries you had not previously seen. This can awaken humility and awe in equal measure. Another important pillar is the cyclical nature of awakening. Seeing the puppeteer is not a one-time event. It happens in layers. You might first see the puppeteer of societal expectation, then later the puppeteer of your own subconscious fears, and perhaps later still, the puppeteer of the self-image you carefully constructed even after awakening. Each unveiling feels final until the next one comes. This is why the journey towards self-awareness is endless. You are both puppet and puppeteer, and in the grander scheme, perhaps a puppet to an even greater puppeteer you have yet to meet. Finally, there is the choice of participation. Once aware, you may choose to step entirely off the stage, to reject the game altogether, or you may choose to keep performing, but in a way that aligns with your deeper will. Some find joy in becoming their own puppeteer, consciously crafting the stories they live. Others seek to dissolve the entire illusion, to live without strings at all, a state rare and difficult, perhaps only reached by those who no longer cling to identity. These core concepts weave together into a paradox. The moment you see the puppeteer, you are still in the theater. You have not escaped it, but the performance has changed forever. You are no longer a passive actor in someone else's script. You are a co-creator, an improviser, and perhaps one day, the architect of an entirely new stage. The journey is not toward a utopia without puppeteers, but toward a conscious relationship with them and with the strings that move you. It is here, in this delicate balance between influence and independence, that the true depth of the phrase reveals itself. It is not merely a declaration of freedom, but a challenge to live awake, to navigate a world where the puppeteer is sometimes an oppressor, sometimes a guide, and sometimes the reflection in your own mirror. Seeing them does not free you from life's complexity, it deepens it. But in that depth lies the possibility of a more authentic existence, one where every movement, whether free or guided, is chosen with open eyes. Symbols have a way of carrying truths across centuries, surviving the erosion of language and culture. The idea that once you see the puppeteer, you'll never be the puppet again, belongs to this ancient current of archetypal imagery. It is a truth that has been told in countless guises, through myth, parable, and dream, always pointing to the same rupture in perception, the same irreversible crossing of a threshold. To explore it symbolically is to step into the hidden corridors of the collective imagination, where the puppet and puppeteer have worn many masks. Consider the old Sufi story of the dervish who wandered into a marketplace at dawn. He saw a man selling marionettes, each dancing in perfect rhythm to the pluck of strings. Their faces were carved with serene smiles, their costumes rich with color. But the dervish noticed something strange. The puppeteer's eyes were not on his puppets, but fixed far above them, as if following the movements of another set of strings that stretched into the sky. When the dervish asked him who held his strings, the puppeteer only smiled and said, "Ah, to see the hand that moves me, then I too would be free." The dervish left in silence, realizing that even the one who seems to control may also be controlled, and that the chain of puppeteers might rise endlessly upward. This is the first symbolic layer, the recognition that no single puppeteer is ultimate. There are always greater forces at play. In another ancient image, the puppeteer takes the form of the weaver. This is the Moirai of Greek myth, or the Norns of Norse legend, figures who spin, measure, and cut the threads of life. Here, the puppet is not carved wood, but a living being whose every movement is part of a pattern woven into the loom. To see the puppeteer is to suddenly notice the loom's vast design, to realize that what you thought were random events are part of an intricate tapestry. This realization changes how you experience each moment, no longer as an isolated occurrence, but as a deliberate stitch in a fabric too large to grasp in its entirety. Yet, with this vision comes the haunting question: can the thread choose its own path, or is the pattern already set? A more modern allegory might be found in the dream of a man who lives in a city where every street is lined with mirrors. From birth, he has been told that these mirrors show the truth of who he is. He spends his life polishing them, admiring them, comparing his reflection to those of others. One day, while cleaning a particularly old mirror, the glass cracks, revealing not himself, but a dim room filled with people adjusting lights, arranging backdrops, and placing props. His reflection had never been unmediated. It was staged. To see the puppeteer in this sense is to realize that much of what you take as you is a curated projection, maintained by unseen hands. The moment you see past the mirror, the old validation loses its power. The symbol of the puppeteer also appears in Eastern traditions, where the puppet is likened to a shadow on the wall. In the shadow play of Southeast Asia, figures cut from leather are held against a screen, lit from behind by a flickering lamp. The audience sees the silhouettes dance and fight, fall in love, or perish. To the unknowing eye, these shadows are the whole story. But for the one who walks behind the screen, the illusion dissolves. The characters are flat, the movements orchestrated, the lamp's light the true source of their existence. The spiritual seeker, on glimpsing this, understands that waking life might itself be a kind of shadow play, a projection of deeper realities. And just as the puppet in the shadow cannot see the puppeteer without turning toward the light, so too must the seeker change the very direction of their gaze to awaken. In Jungian psychology, the puppeteer can be seen as the archetypal self, the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. The puppet is the ego, the part of us that identifies with a name, a history, a set of roles. Jung's work suggests that life's purpose is not to remain a puppet, nor to destroy the puppeteer, but to integrate the two, so that the strings become channels of communication rather than instruments of control. In dreams, this integration might appear as meeting a wise old figure who reveals they have been guiding your steps, not to confine you, but to lead you toward wholeness. There is also the shadow side of this narrative, the false puppeteer. This is the manipulator who poses as the ultimate hand, demanding loyalty and obedience, insisting that without them, the puppet will collapse. History is filled with such figures, tyrants, cult leaders, systems that promise safety in exchange for submission. Symbolically, they are the counterfeit gods of the psyche, reflections of our own fears and dependencies. Seeing through them, recognizing that they are not the ultimate source of life, breaks their hold. But it also forces the seeker to step into a space where the true puppeteer may still be unknown, a space of uncertainty that demands courage. A recurring symbolic thread in these stories is the moment of hesitation after the seeing. The puppet who has glimpsed the strings does not immediately leap to freedom. there is often a pause, a trembling. This hesitation is deeply human. It is the recognition that freedom is not the absence of strings, but the awareness of them. In some myths, the puppet chooses to return to the play, but now as a conscious participant, altering the story from within. In others, the puppet cuts itself free, wandering into an unmapped wilderness where there may be no applause, no script, no clear destination. Perhaps the most haunting allegory is the one in which the puppet discovers that the puppeteer is none other than itself, existing outside of time. In this vision, every choice the puppet makes is simultaneously the choice of the puppeteer, and every motion of the puppeteer is the puppet's own yearning expressed in a different dimension. The separation was always an illusion. To see the puppeteer here is not to discover an enemy or even a guide, but to awaken to the truth that you are both the dancer and the hand that moves the dance. These symbolic narratives all point to the same transformation. Awareness shatters the closed loop of illusion. Whether you choose to remain on the stage or walk away, you will never again believe that the strings are the totality of your life. You will sense the wider field in which both puppet and puppeteer exist. And in that wider field, every step, every choice, every silence becomes infused with a deeper intentionality, because you are no longer sleepwalking through a script you didn't know you were following. You are awake in the theater, aware of the lights, the stagehands, the set changes, and the vast darkness beyond the spotlight's reach. Awareness, once awakened, is not meant to be preserved in a glass case as some intellectual curiosity. Seeing the puppeteer changes nothing if the vision remains a private spectacle, sealed off from the rest of life. The true challenge begins the moment you step back into the flow of daily existence and attempt to live with this awareness intact. In that sense, the shift from puppet to conscious participant is less about the moment of revelation and more about the long, ongoing work of integration, taking what you have seen and weaving it into the way you move through the world. The first implication is a subtle but profound change in how you respond to influence. Before, the strings tugged invisibly. Now you can feel each pull as it happens. This doesn't mean you suddenly become immune to suggestion or manipulation. Advertisements will still play on your desires. Social norms will still exert pressure. Fear will still whisper in moments of uncertainty. But the difference is that you can pause before moving. You can ask, is this truly my will, or is this the echo of a script I've been handed? In that pause, you regain agency. Over time, this becomes a habit, not a paranoid hypervigilance, but a gentle filtering process, a continual sorting of your inner responses into those you choose and those you decline. In relationships, the vision of the puppeteer often sparks a deep reevaluation. You begin to notice the unspoken agreements that shape how people treat each other, roles inherited from family patterns, unexamined expectations carried from culture, unconscious power dynamics. Some connections will deepen because you now engage them without pretense. Others will fade, not out of bitterness, but because you can no longer comfortably occupy a role that requires you to be less awake. You might find yourself stepping out of conversations where the strings are obvious: gossip, manipulation, performative outrage, not to retreat from others, but to preserve the integrity of your own movements. The workplace, too, becomes a different landscape. Every organization has its own set of strings: hierarchies, incentive structures, unspoken rules about what is rewarded and what is ignored. Before, these forces might have been invisible currents carrying you along. Now, they stand out in sharp relief. You might choose to navigate them more skillfully, using your awareness to work within the system without being consumed by it. Or you may decide the cost of dancing to that particular tune is too high and seek a stage where the music aligns more closely with your values. In either case, you are no longer a passive performer. You are conscious of the choreography. One of the most transformative aspects of integrating this awareness is learning to work with your own inner puppeteer. Much of the conditioning that governs us is internalized. The outer hand that once pulled the strings has been replaced by an inner voice that knows the cues by heart. This voice may speak in the language of doubt, fear, perfectionism, or the need for approval. Seeing it for what it is does not banish it immediately. Instead, the work is to become a compassionate observer, to recognize when you are about to move because that voice demands it, and to choose differently when necessary. Over time, the inner puppeteer loses its grip, and the strings it holds begin to dissolve. Integration also means accepting the ongoing presence of mystery. It's tempting, after glimpsing the puppeteer, to believe you have now seen the truth. But there are always more layers, forces subtler and vaster than the one you've just recognized. The humility to admit that you may still be a puppet in other ways is what keeps the awakening process alive. It prevents the hardening of awareness into a new dogma. This humility is not self-doubt. It is the understanding that consciousness is an ever-expanding horizon, not a final destination. On a more tangible level, this awareness reshapes your relationship with choice and consequence. You may start to approach decisions differently, not by asking what will bring the quickest comfort, but by asking which choice is most aligned with your deeper values. This shift has practical repercussions. You might spend money differently, speak more honestly, refuse to participate in certain systems or conversations, or create projects that feel risky but authentic. The ripple effect of these decisions is enormous because it changes the patterns of influence not only for you, but for those around you. In moments of conflict, seeing the puppeteer allows you to step back from the immediate drama. Instead of reacting solely to the surface story, you can look for the underlying strings, the fear driving the other person's anger, the insecurity behind their control, the unhealed wound beneath their withdrawal. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior, but it does offer a way to respond that is less entangled, less likely to feed the same unconscious cycles. By refusing to be pulled into the reflexive dance, you introduce the possibility of a different outcome. The integration of this awareness also requires nurturing environments that support wakefulness. It's one thing to see the puppeteer in a moment of solitude. It's another to remain aware in the midst of constant distractions, noise, and emotional triggers. You may find yourself drawn to communities, practices, or spaces that remind you to keep your eyes open. This could be meditation, journaling, creative work, time in nature, or honest dialogue with others who have glimpsed their own strings. Such practices are not escapes from the world. They are ways to strengthen your capacity to return to it without falling back asleep. Perhaps the most challenging real-world implication is the loneliness that can accompany clarity. When you see the strings, you may feel separated from those who do not, or cannot, acknowledge them. Conversations that once felt engaging may now seem hollow. This is where the choice of how to live with your awareness becomes most acute. You can isolate yourself in quiet superiority, or you can remain among others with patience and compassion, planting seeds where you can. The puppeteer metaphor reminds us that we all awaken in stages, and that someone else's strings may not yet be visible to them. Ultimately, the practical integration of seeing the puppeteer is not about abolishing all influence, an impossible task, but about living in conscious relationship with it. You may still choose to follow certain patterns, to participate in systems, to play certain roles. The difference is that you do so knowingly, able to step away at will. This conscious participation transforms the stage from a place of confinement into a place of creation. The strings become threads you can weave into new designs, patterns that express your chosen values rather than your inherited programming. Living with this awareness means walking a narrow bridge between two worlds. The one where most people are still enmeshed in the play, and the one where you can see the set, the lighting, and the hands that move it all. You learn to move between them, sometimes speaking the language of the play, sometimes stepping into the wings to adjust the scenery yourself. This mobility, this freedom to enter and exit the illusion, is one of the greatest gifts of having seen the puppeteer. It is also one of the greatest responsibilities, for the way you move on that bridge can inspire others to look up at their own strings, or it can reinforce the belief that the play is all there is. To see the puppeteer is to inherit a double vision, one eye on the performance, the other on the structure behind it. Integration is learning to live with both open at once, not letting either blind the other. You are not here to destroy the theater, but to dance within it as someone who knows the floor is wood, the stars are painted, and the story can be rewritten at any time. There comes a moment in every great journey when the traveler stands at the edge of all they have known and must decide not just where to step, but how to step. The phrase, "Once you see the puppeteer, you'll never be the puppet again," is not the end of a tale. It is that edge. It is the precipice where awareness and choice meet, where the comfort of the old choreography falls away and the open air of possibility rushes in. Everything you have read, reflected on, or lived since that first glimpse of the strings has been moving you toward this precipice, preparing you not only to see differently, but to live differently. The journey from puppet to awakened participant is not about severing every connection or fleeing the stage altogether. The theater remains, the players remain, the music still swells and falls in waves. What changes is the seat you occupy in the house, or perhaps that you no longer have only one seat. You can step onto the stage when you wish, deliver your lines with intention, even improvise entire scenes. You can step into the wings and watch others perform, understanding that their gestures are not random, but guided by their own unseen chords. You can climb into the rafters and glimpse the architecture, the lights, the machinery. You move freely now, and with that freedom comes an entirely new relationship to the performance of life. This is the heart of transformation, not the destruction of the old world, but the conscious inhabiting of it. You carry the knowledge of the puppeteer like a compass, a quiet instrument that constantly orients you toward authenticity. It is not a map, for the map would be fixed, and life is not fixed. The compass simply points, sometimes toward a conversation you might have avoided, sometimes toward a decision that feels risky, sometimes toward the patience to remain still while others play out their scenes. There will be moments when you long for the simplicity of the puppet's life, for the relief of not having to choose. Awareness is heavy at times. It demands that you face the fact that your life is authored moment by moment, choice by choice. There will be temptations to numb it, to pretend you never saw the strings, to move again without thinking. But even if you try, the knowledge remains. The strings glow faintly in your vision now. They catch the light no matter how you turn your head. You cannot unknow them, and in truth, you would not wish to. For along with the weight of choice comes the exhilaration of agency, the quiet thrill of knowing that you can shape your role, your relationships, your world. Transformation is rarely loud. It is not the grand proclamation that you are free, but the steady unfolding of a different way of being. You might notice it in how you speak, less from impulse, more from intention. You might notice it in what you no longer tolerate, not out of pride, but out of alignment. You might notice it in your capacity to remain present in situations that once sent you spinning into automatic reactions. Little by little, the dance changes, and with each change, the chords grow lighter, less binding, until they are threads you hold in your own hands. Living in this way means accepting the paradox that the puppeteer is not always other. Sometimes, the hand that tugs at you is your own, an older version of you, still acting from fear or habit. Part of your work now is to recognize those moments and choose anew, to thank the old self for its service and gently guide it toward rest. Other times, you will meet puppeteers in the world, people, systems, ideologies that seek to pull you back into unconscious movement. Here, your task is not to fight blindly, but to engage with discernment. You may resist, you may collaborate, you may simply step aside. But in each case, you choose. This is the quiet revolution that comes from seeing the puppeteer. You move from reaction to creation. You are no longer defined by the strings you inherited, but by the threads you weave. Every word you speak, every boundary you set, every risk you take becomes part of your own choreography. You stop waiting for someone else to write the next act because you have realized that the script is always in your hands, even when you choose to improvise. And there is more. Once you see the puppeteer, you begin to notice that others, too, are on the verge of seeing. Perhaps they catch the strings in the corner of their eye. Perhaps they feel an unease they can't quite name. Here lies one of the most profound implications of your awakening. You can become the mirror in which they glimpse their own chords. Not by telling them. Direct confrontation often drives the puppet deeper into the dance, but by living in a way that subtly shows another possibility. Your freedom, your presence, your refusal to move unconsciously becomes an unspoken invitation. In this sense, the transformational call is twofold. It is the call to live awake for yourself, to inhabit your life fully, to own the authorship of your days. And it is the call to live awake for the sake of the whole, to become part of a quiet, uncoordinated chorus of individuals who have seen and cannot unsee, whose very being shifts the texture of the stage. This is not a crusade. It is not about forcing others to wake. It is about keeping your eyes open so that when they are ready, they have a place to look. You may never know the full extent of your influence. A single conversation, a single refusal to act on an unconscious cue, a single act of generosity free from manipulation, these can ripple outward in ways you cannot track. In time, they may lead another to their own moment of seeing. This is how the web changes, not by cutting all the strings at once, but by gradually altering the patterns of movement until the dance itself transforms. The stage will always be there. The plays will continue. The puppeteers will take many forms, some visible, some hidden, some benevolent, some harmful. What changes is your relationship to them. You are no longer at their mercy, nor are you at war with them. You are in conversation with them. You can take the string, set it down, weave it into something new. You can step off stage and into the audience, then back again. The theater is no longer a prison. It is a place of endless possibility. And so the final call is simple, but not easy. Live with your eyes open. Do not turn away from what you have seen, even when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable. Let the awareness shape you. Let it challenge you. Let it guide you into choices that honor the truth you now carry. Be willing to be misunderstood, to walk alone at times, to risk stepping out of step with the chorus. In doing so, you honor not just your own liberation, but the deeper current of life itself, the one that has been tugging at you all along, not to bind you, but to awaken you. When you first saw The Puppeteer, it may have felt like a shattering, but in truth, it was a beginning, the first crack in the shell, the first breath outside the script. That breath is yours to claim now, and the world is waiting for the way you will move next. Step forward with intention. Step forward with awareness. Step forward knowing that the strings are no longer unseen, and that your hands, more than anyone else's, will shape the dance you choose to live. You are no longer the puppet. You are the one who moves.